Imagine waking up in a world where winter never truly ends. The wind cuts across endless plains of snow. Food is never guaranteed, and a single mistake in the cold can mean death. Yet thousands of years ago, ancient people not only survived these frozen landscapes, they thrived in them. They hunted mammoths, built shelters from bone and hide, carried fire across the ice, and raised families in one of the harshest environments Earth has ever known. Tonight, we uncover the remarkable story of how humans conquered the endless snow. Before we begin, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for more fascinating journeys into the mysteries of the ancient world. The snow is not falling gently. It is driving sideways across a pale world where the horizon has almost disappeared, where sky and ground seem made from the same cold breath, and where a human footprint can vanish before the person who made it has taken 20 more steps. Somewhere beyond the curtain of white, a small group moves close together. They do not walk as wanderers. They walk as people who know that the land is watching them in its own silent way. Every ridge of ice, every patch of wind-polished crust, every hollow where powder gathers can mean shelter, danger, or the faint promise of food. Their faces are covered with fur and hide. Their hands are wrapped, their feet bound against the biting ground, and beneath their clothing their bodies burn through precious strength simply to remain alive. Nothing about this place forgives carelessness. A broken ankle can become a death sentence. A lost ember can become a catastrophe. A missed trail in the snow can mean the difference between a meal and another night of hunger. In this frozen world, survival is not a single invention. It is a chain of small answers, each one fragile, each one tested again and again by wind, darkness, hunger, and time. Ancient people do not conquer endless snow in the way later legends sometimes imagine. They negotiate with it. They learn its moods. They find the places where animals pass, where water hides beneath ice, where the wind has stripped a slope bare enough to expose grass for grazing herds. They learn which snow can be walked upon and which will swallow the leg to the thigh. They learn that cold is not merely discomfort. Cold is a force that steals thought, slows fingers, dulls judgment, and turns ordinary mistakes into disasters. What survives in the record suggests that the people who lived through these environments were not primitive figures stumbling through a hostile wasteland. They were skilled observers, makers, trackers, planners, and caretakers, carrying knowledge that could not be written down because writing did not yet exist, but that had to be remembered perfectly because lives depended on it. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. The story ahead is not simply about cold weather. It is about the ancient human ability to remain human in places where nature seemed to strip life down to its hardest terms. The phrase endless snow can sound almost mythical, but for many ancient communities it was close to a lived reality. During glacial periods, great ice sheets locked away vast amounts of the planet's water. Sea levels fell, forests retreated, grasslands and open tundra expanded across regions that today may seem temperate, green, and safe. In parts of Ice Age Eurasia, North America, and high mountain zones, winter was not a short interruption. It could dominate the year, shaping everything from animal movement to shelter design, from clothing technology to the timing of birth and migration. Yet the evidence remains incomplete. Archaeologists do not find every campsite, every lost child, every desperate decision made in a storm. Much of the ancient world was built from perishable things: hide, wood, sinew, grass, fat, memory. Snow itself preserves almost nothing unless it becomes ice under rare conditions. So the story has to be pieced together from scattered bones, stone tools, hearth stains, cave sediments, preserved footprints, broken needles, cut marks, charcoal, pollen, and the silent geography of places where people once dared to stay. One of the first truths of such a world is that snow changes the meaning of distance. A valley that seems close in summer can become remote when drifts fill the hollows and winds erase familiar paths. A herd seen at dawn may be unreachable by noon. A frozen river can become a road, but it can also become a trap, its surface hiding weak places where dark water runs underneath. Ancient people living in cold regions have to understand movement as carefully as food. They need routes that connect shelter to hunting grounds, water sources, fuel, and raw materials. A good stone for tools may lie many miles away. Dry wood may be rare in open steppe tundra. Animal fat may matter as much as meat, because lean meat alone cannot feed a body fighting cold for long. Scholars still debate the exact movements of many Ice Age groups, especially where the evidence is thin, but one thing is clear. Survival required a mental map far richer than the white emptiness would suggest to modern eyes. The land is not empty to them. It is marked by memory. A dark line of shrubs along a frozen stream may mean fuel. A low rise may block enough wind to make a camp possible. A cliff edge may funnel reindeer, horse, bison, or mammoth along predictable paths. A field of old bones may show where predators fed before, or where humans once butchered an animal and may return if the season repeats itself. The snow records passing life. Hooves break through crust. Wolves leave narrow trails. Birds gather where carcasses lie open. Foxes dive for rodents beneath the surface. The ancient hunter sees not a blank plain, but a page written overnight. This kind of reading is easy to underestimate because it leaves little behind. A stone blade can be excavated. A judgment made from the angle of a track cannot. Yet without that judgment, the blade is almost useless. Cold also changes the human body from within. Fingers stiffen first. Fine work becomes difficult. A knot that would be simple beside a summer fire becomes a challenge when the wind cuts through every pause. Wet clothing becomes dangerous. Sweat, so harmless in warmer weather, can turn against the body when movement stops. Ancient people have to balance effort and exposure, heat and exhaustion. They need layered clothing that traps air, shelters that hold warmth without filling with smoke, and food rich enough to feed the inner furnace. The surprising detail is that cold survival is not only about avoiding freezing, it is also about avoiding overheating during work, because damp inner layers can become deadly later. This is the sort of practical knowledge that likely passed through generations not as abstract instruction, but as habit, correction, and remembered loss. Round a hearth, the frozen world becomes smaller. Firelight pushes back the dark, but never far. Beyond it, snow reflects faint light under moon or stars, making the night strangely visible and strangely deceptive. Smoke rises through hide coverings or cave mouths. Fat sizzles. Tools are repaired. Children are warmed. Elders carry memories of roots, storms, animal behavior, and past disasters. No single explanation fully accounts for how humans endured the most severe cold regions. Because survival was never only technological. Fire matters, but fire without fuel fails. Clothing matters, but clothing without sewing fails. Hunting matters, but hunting without cooperation fails. Knowledge matters, but knowledge without care for the injured and young cannot carry a group through long seasons. The ancient answer to endless snow is a system, and that system is social as much as material. This is where the mystery deepens. Humans are tropical animals in origin. The body is not naturally armoured like a muskox, not thick-furred like a wolf, not built with hooves to scrape frozen ground. Yet humans enter cold lands and remain there. They do not merely pass through in a lucky warm spell. They learn to live in places where breath freezes on fur, where storms bury camps, where darkness lengthens, where plant foods vanish for months, and where a wrong decision can ripple through the whole group. In some regions, Neanderthals had lived with cold for hundreds of thousands of years before Homo sapiens spread widely into Europe and Northern Asia. Later, modern humans brought different toolkits, ornaments, long-distance networks, and perhaps new ways of organizing information. But the record is complex. Scholars still debate how much survival depended on biological adaptation, how much on culture, and how much on chance. The snow kept no simple answer. What can be said is that ancient people survived by refusing to depend on one thing alone. They read the weather, but also built shelters. They hunted, but also scavenged, stored, and shared. They made fire, but also protected embers. They followed herds, but also knew when not to follow them. They used caves where caves existed, but across the open plains they created architecture from hides, bones, posts, stones, snow, and windbreaks. They made clothing not as decoration first, but as portable shelter. They turned animal bodies into food, tools, thread, coverings, fuel, and containers. A killed mammoth, reindeer, horse, seal, or bison could become far more than meat. In the cold, almost every part of an animal could matter. Waste was not simply careless, it could be dangerous. And still, the danger never disappears. A storm can outrun planning, a herd can fail to arrive, a thaw can weaken ice, a child can become ill, a hunter can return empty-handed, a hearth can die in the night. The archaeological record sometimes gives only the hard outline of these lives, but even that outline carries a strange emotional weight. Burned bones in a cave, needles carved from bone, footprints crossing ancient mud that later hardened into memory. Mammoth bones arranged in circles on open ground, cut marks where frozen meat was separated from bone, red ochre on objects carried far from their source. These traces suggest not only endurance, but meaning. People in the cold did not live as machines of survival. They decorated objects, cared for the dead, maintained relationships, taught children, and likely told stories beside the fire while wind moved over the snow outside. The world they inhabited was not permanently frozen everywhere, nor was it always uniformly bleak. Ice Age environments varied greatly by region and period. Some places were dry, grassy, and bitterly cold rather than buried under deep snow all year. Others shifted between thawing summers and brutal winters. Some coastal zones offered fish, shellfish, seabirds, and marine mammals. Some valleys became refuges. Some regions were simply too harsh for long occupation at certain times. The evidence remains incomplete, and it is important not to imagine one universal Ice Age scene repeated across the whole planet. But wherever snow and cold ruled for long stretches, ancient people faced a central problem: how to turn a landscape that seemed to remove possibilities into one that still offered enough choices to survive. The first step was perception. They had to notice what modern travellers might miss. Snow piling on one side of a stone reveals the wind. A crust broken in a certain way reveals the weight and direction of an animal. A faint depression may mark an old fire pit beneath new snow. The smell of smoke can linger low in still air. The silence of birds can signal a predator or a weather change. A distant dark shape may be a boulder, a carcass, or a living animal standing still against the storm. In such a world, attention is not a virtue in the abstract, it is food, warmth, and return. The second step was memory. The cold season punishes those who treat each day as separate. Ancient groups had to know where animals moved last year, where storms gathered, where water stayed accessible, where stone could be found, where a cave mouth faced away from the worst wind, where deadwood might remain under snow, and where other groups might be encountered. These memories may have lived in stories, gestures, songs, landmarks, seasonal routines, and the teaching of children. None of this survives easily in the ground. Archaeology can show patterns of repeated occupation, long-distance material movement, and carefully chosen camp locations. But the lived intelligence behind those patterns has to be inferred. What survives in the record suggests planning, not panic. The third step was cooperation. A person alone in endless snow is terribly vulnerable. A group can divide labour, protect children, share warmth, carry fuel, process hides, watch weather, repair tools, and remember more than one mind can hold. Yet group life also creates pressure. More people need more food. Decisions must be made about when to move, when to stay, when to risk a hunt, and how to care for those who cannot contribute equally at every moment. Some ancient skeletons show survival after injury or illness, suggesting care within communities. The exact stories are lost, but the implication is powerful. Survival in the cold was not only the triumph of the strong, it was also the endurance of the connected. So the opening image of ancient people walking through snow is not a scene of helplessness. It is a scene of calculation. Their path bends away from the worst wind. Their clothing carries the labour of many hands. Their tools carry knowledge older than any one person. Their fire, if they have brought embers with them, carries yesterday into tonight. Around them, the frozen land offers no guarantee, only signs. The group moves through a world where survival depends on recognizing those signs before they vanish. Behind them, the snow closes over their footprints. Ahead, somewhere beyond the white distance, there may be shelter, fuel, animals, and another night alive. Before people could learn to survive in endless snow, the world itself had to change around them. It didn't happen all at once. There was no single morning when ancient families stepped outside and found the earth transformed into a frozen kingdom. Climate moves in pulses, in long pressures and uneven rhythms, colder for a generation, then softer, then colder again. Ice grows slowly at first, gathering on mountains and northern lands, thickening season after season until it becomes a force large enough to reshape continents. Forests draw back, grasslands widen, rivers alter their courses, sea levels fall as water is locked inside glaciers. Coastlines move far beyond where modern maps place them. Lands that are now under the sea become open plains crossed by animals and people. Other lands become blocked, buried, or made too dangerous to use. The ancient world does not freeze like a pond. It rearranges itself. For the people living through these shifts, the change is measured not in charts or global averages, but in practical losses and discoveries. A familiar grove may thin until it no longer gives enough wood. A valley once rich with plants may become a wind corridor. Animals that once passed near camp may move farther south or follow different grazing routes. Snow may linger longer on shaded slopes. Frost may arrive earlier, a lake may freeze thick enough to cross, or vanish behind ice and sediment. What survives in the record suggests that ancient people responded to these changes with movement, memory, and invention, but the evidence remains incomplete. Archaeology rarely captures the first moment of adaptation. It captures the traces left after people have already found a way to continue. The colder worlds of the Pleistocene were not simple white deserts. That is one of the first surprises. Many Ice Age landscapes were dry, open, and full of life, especially the steppe tundra regions that stretched across huge parts of Eurasia and Beringia. These places could be brutally cold, but they supported grasses, sedges, herbs, and low shrubs that fed mammoth, horse, bison, reindeer, woolly rhinoceros, muskox, and other animals. To modern eyes, such landscapes may seem impossible, a cold plain rich enough to support enormous herds, yet that combination of cold, dryness, and seasonal plant growth created one of the great animal worlds in human history. It was dangerous, harsh, and unstable, but not empty. For ancient hunters, it offered both opportunity and risk. Where animals gathered, people could live. Where herds failed, people had to move or suffer. The expansion of ice also created strange corridors. As sea levels dropped, land bridges appeared, including the vast region known as Beringia between Northeast Asia and northwestern North America. It was not merely a narrow bridge, but a broad landscape in its own right, with its own climates, animals, and human possibilities. Other exposed shelves around the world changed migration routes and coastal resources. At the same time, massive ice sheets could close paths as easily as they opened others. Movement through the frozen world was never simply a matter of walking north or south. It depended on timing, local knowledge, animal migrations, and the changing shape of ice itself. Scholars still debate the exact routes and timings of many ancient migrations, especially where later rising seas drowned the evidence. Much of the coastline that early people may have used now lies underwater, silent and difficult to recover. As cold deepened, ancient communities faced a narrowing of easy options. Plant foods became more seasonal in many regions. Trees became scarcer across open plains, making fuel harder to find. Water could be present everywhere as snow and ice, yet still be difficult to use without heat. Meat could freeze solid. Tools could crack. Hides could stiffen. A person could wake alive and still lose fingers to frostbite if coverings failed. These conditions demanded more than courage. They demanded systems of preparation. People had to gather fuel before storms, process skins before the deepest cold, repair tools before a hunt, and know where to go when a camp stopped working. In warmer landscapes, improvisation might save a careless group. In severe cold, improvisation came too late. The shift into colder worlds also changed the relationship between humans and shelter. In forests or milder zones, trees, branches, leaves, reeds, bark, and earth could provide many building materials. In open frozen environments, the menu became narrower and more difficult. A cave could be precious, but caves were not everywhere, and many were already used by animals. A rock overhang might shield a hearth, but not a whole season. On the plains, people had to carry shelter or build it from what the land offered: hide, bone, tusk, antler, stone, snow, turf, and occasional wood. This need helped push forward one of the most important human ideas home as something movable, repairable, and made from parts of the world already hunted, gathered, or remembered. A shelter was not only a place, it was stored knowledge made visible. The cold also changed time. Summer became the season of urgency, not ease. Long daylight and returning animals offered abundance, but that abundance had to be converted into future survival. Meat could be dried, smoked, frozen, cached, or shared. Hides needed scraping, stretching, softening, and sewing. Bones and antlers could be shaped into tools. Fat had to be rendered or protected. Stone tools had to be replaced. Roots had to be tested. Children had to learn. The warm season was not a vacation from hardship. It was the workshop of winter. No single explanation fully accounts for the success of ancient groups in cold environments, but preparation clearly mattered. The people who survived the snow were already surviving it before the first heavy storm arrived. In some regions, humans were not the only people facing these worlds. Neanderthals had lived across cold and temperate parts of Eurasia for hundreds of thousands of years. Their bodies show adaptations often interpreted as useful in cold climates: compact builds, powerful limbs, large noses, and strong musculature, though scholars still debate the exact meaning of every trait. Modern humans arriving or expanding into similar regions brought their own advantages, including flexible technologies, long-distance exchange networks, symbolic objects, and perhaps broader social ties. The interaction between these human forms remains one of the deep mysteries of prehistory. Cold did not act alone, but it shaped the stage on which survival, contact, competition, and disappearance unfolded. For ancient people, the approach of colder conditions may not have felt like a grand climatic event. It may have felt like a series of hard years, a winter that comes too soon, a herd that passes too far away, a river crossing that fails, a child born in a season when food is thin, an old campsite abandoned because the fuel is gone, a new route discovered because the old one no longer works. Over generations, these choices accumulate. People who cannot adjust disappear from a region, move elsewhere, or leave no visible trace. People who can adjust become the ancestors of later survival stories. The snow does not preserve every failure, but it helps explain why every success matters. There is a quiet irony in this ancient cold. The same harsh conditions that threatened people also preserved some of their traces more clearly than warmer. Wetter lands might have done. Frozen ground, dry caves, and cold sediments can protect bones, tools, and even rare organic materials under the right conditions. Yet preservation is uneven. Many camps vanished under erosion, ice movement, flooding, or later human disturbance. Some of the most important evidence may rest beneath modern seas, where Ice Age coasts once stretched outward. This is why the record feels both rich and frustrating. It shows enough to reveal astonishing skill, but not enough to give every answer. The movement into colder worlds was therefore not a single heroic leap. It was a long education forced by climate, landscape, and hunger. Ancient people learned that snow could conceal food and reveal it, block a path and create one, kill the careless and protect the prepared. They learned that the world's cold edges were not empty margins, but demanding territories with their own logic. As ice spread and seasons hardened, human life had to become more deliberate. The body alone was not enough. A sharp stone alone was not enough. Fire alone was not enough. Survival required the weaving together of landscape knowledge, social memory, technology, and timing. And so, before the deepest snow becomes the central problem, the larger story begins with transformation. The planet cools, ice advances, seas retreat, animals shift, and human beings find themselves inside a world that keeps changing the rules. Some groups follow familiar resources until those resources fade. Others discover new patterns in the cold. A few learn how to carry warmth with them, how to build shelter where none appears to exist, how to turn animals into clothing, food, tools, and fuel, and how to read a white landscape that to others would seem unreadable. The endless winter is not born in one storm. It is born slowly, through centuries of adaptation, until snow is no longer an interruption in human life, but one of the great teachers of human survival. The human body is a warm thing in a cold universe, and in endless snow that simple fact becomes a daily emergency. Beneath fur, hide, sinew, and smoke-stained coverings, ancient people carried the same fragile inner temperature that humans carry now. Let it fall too far, and thought begins to blur, muscles weaken, speech becomes clumsy, judgment fails before the body fully understands the danger. Cold does not always kill with drama. Often it kills by making a person slow, sleepy, and strangely willing to stop. For ancient communities living in frozen landscapes, survival began with the body's limits, because every tool, every shelter, every fire, and every journey existed to defend that narrow warmth inside the chest. Humans did not enter the cold with the natural armor of the animals they hunted. A reindeer could stand in winter wind with hollow hair trapping air against its skin. A wolf could sleep curled into its own fur. A mammoth carried a massive body, fat, and a coat built for the open steppe. Humans had skin that sweated, fingers that lost heat quickly, and infants born helpless. Yet this weakness also came with a strange strength. Humans could make external bodies for themselves. Clothing became a second skin. Shelter became a larger body shared by the group. Fire became an artificial sun carried from camp to camp. What survives in the record suggests that cold adaptation was never only biological. It was biological, cultural, social, and technological all at once. Still, the body itself mattered. Populations living in colder climates over long periods often show patterns that may help conserve heat-broader bodies, shorter limbs relative to trunk size, and greater mass that reduces heat loss compared with surface area. Neanderthals are often discussed in this context, with their powerful builds, wide chests, and compact proportions. Scholars still debate how much of this reflects cold adaptation, physical activity, ancestry, or a mixture of all three. But the pattern fits a world where heat was precious. Early modern humans moving into colder regions may not have had the same body shape to the same degree, but they carried unusually flexible culture. Instead of waiting for evolution alone, they wrapped themselves in invention. Food was one of the body's first defenses. In deep cold, calories were not merely fuel for movement. They were fuel for staying alive while doing nothing. A person sitting in a shelter during a freezing night still burned energy to keep warm. A hunter trudging through snow burned far more. Lean meat could fill the stomach, but fat was especially valuable, dense with energy, and useful in ways that ancient people likely understood through long experience. Marrow inside bones, brain tissue, stored body fat, and fatty organs could matter greatly. In some cold environments, people who relied too heavily on very lean meat could suffer despite having animal flesh available. The evidence remains incomplete for many Ice Age diets, but cut marks on bones, smashed marrow bones, and patterns of animal processing suggest that ancient people often pursued not just meat, but the richest parts of the body. There is a lesser-known danger here: cold survival can fail even when food seems present. A group might kill an animal and still face nutritional strain if the season has made the animal lean. Herds themselves change through the year, fattening and thinning according to migration, breeding, and winter stress. Ancient hunters had to know not only what animal to hunt, but when that animal was worth the risk. A successful hunt in the wrong season could provide less energy than expected. This kind of knowledge rarely leaves obvious traces, but it may have shaped decisions as much as weapon design did. The best hunters were not simply those who could strike, they were those who understood the hidden calendar inside animal bodies. The skin was another battlefield. Exposed skin loses heat quickly, but covered skin brings its own problems. Work too hard under heavy clothing, and sweat gathers. Stop moving, and that dampness chills the body. Snow that melts into footwear can freeze again. A poorly dried hide can stiffen. A seam can leak wind. Ancient people had to manage moisture with care. They needed coverings that trapped warmth but allowed movement, boots that protected feet from frozen ground, mitts that preserved fingers, and hoods that shielded the face. The discovery and use of bone needles in the Upper Paleolithic point to increasingly tailored clothing, not just hides draped over shoulders. A shaped garment fits closer, wastes less heat, and allows the body to work in cold air. It is difficult to overstate how important this was. In the frozen world, sewing was survival technology. Hands were especially important, because hands made every other defense possible. A person with numb fingers could not easily strike sparks, tie bindings, repair a point, butcher an animal, soften hide, or care for a child. The body naturally protects its core by reducing blood flow to the extremities, but that protection endangers fingers and toes. Ancient people likely learned to work in rhythms hands briefly exposed, then warmed, tasks prepared before the worst cold, delicate repairs done near the fire or inside shelter. The archaeological record preserves finished tools more often than the bodily routines that made them possible, yet behind every stone blade is a hand that had to stay warm enough to make and use it. Infants and children created another challenge. A baby cannot regulate temperature like an adult, cannot walk, cannot choose shelter, cannot understand danger. In a severe cold environment, children required constant warmth, food, and protection, making survival a group task rather than a private achievement. This may be one reason social bonds mattered so deeply. Care had to be organized. Someone had to carry, watch, feed, cover, and teach. Elders, too, may have held value beyond physical strength, because knowledge of routes, seasons, weather signs, and past disasters could save lives. No single explanation fully accounts for ancient survival in frozen lands, but bodies alone clearly did not endure without relationships around them. Cold also shaped sleep. The body at rest produces less heat through movement, and long winter nights could be dangerous. People may have slept close together, sharing warmth beneath hides, near embers, inside shelters designed to reduce drafts. Fire maintenance may have required waking in shifts, or at least careful preparation before sleep. Ash could preserve coals. Stones near a fire could hold warmth for a time. Bedding made from hides, grasses, moss, or other insulating materials could separate bodies from frozen ground. Because the earth beneath a sleeper can steal warmth as surely as air. Archaeology sometimes finds hearths and occupation layers, but the softness of bedding usually vanishes. What remains is only the hint of domestic life around fire. The body's relationship with cold was also mental. Hunger, darkness, and freezing weather wear down attention, a group might know what to do and still struggle to do it after weeks of poor food or repeated storms. Ancient people had to maintain not only warmth, but morale and cooperation. Small rituals, ornaments, body decoration, storytelling, and shared routines may have helped hold communities together. These things can sound secondary beside food and shelter, but in hard environments the will to continue is not a luxury. It is part of survival. Beads, pigments, carved objects, and decorated tools found in Ice Age contexts suggest that people carried meaning with them into the cold. They were not only keeping bodies alive, they were preserving identity. There were also injuries that cold made worse. A cut could become harder to treat when water was frozen and fingers were numb. A sprain could slow movement when movement was necessary. Smoke from poorly ventilated shelters could irritate lungs and eyes, but without fire the danger was greater. Frostbite might damage skin before a person fully realized it. Snow glare could affect vision. Dehydration could occur in a world surrounded by frozen water. Because snow had to be melted or consumed at a cost to body heat. The evidence for specific medical practices in deep prehistory is limited, but survival after serious injury in some ancient remains suggests care. Someone unable to hunt could still live if others fed and protected them. That fact alone changes the image of Ice Age life. It was harsh, but not empty of compassion. The ancient body in endless snow was therefore neither helpless nor invincible. It was a vulnerable organism defended by layers of knowledge. Fat fed it, clothing guarded it, fire revived it, shelter surrounded it, companions protected it, memory guided it away from avoidable danger. The cold tested every weakness, but it also rewarded intelligence repeated over generations. People who understood their bodies could pace themselves, dress properly, eat strategically, warm children first, protect hands, and stop before exhaustion became fatal. Those who misjudged the cold might leave no trace at all. So as the frozen world expands around ancient communities, survival becomes a kind of partnership between flesh and invention. The body provides warmth, movement, hunger, pain, and warning. Culture answers with food sharing, sewn clothing, hearths, shelters, tools, and rules remembered because someone once failed to follow them. The snow may seem endless, but human warmth is not. It has to be guarded every hour. And in that guarded warmth, beneath skins and beside fires, the ancient story of cold survival becomes something more than endurance. It becomes the story of how a fragile tropical creature learned to carry its own climate through the ice. Warmth, in the frozen world, was not a feeling. It was an invention that had to be made again and again. A camp could not simply possess warmth the way a cave possesses darkness or a river possesses water. Warmth had to be gathered from wood, bone, fat, grass, hide, stone, ash, and human labour. It had to be protected from wind, preserved through the night, and rebuilt after every move. Ancient people did not survive endless snow because they found one perfect shelter or one perfect fire. They survived because they learned how to trap small amounts of heat inside a world determined to take it away. A hearth was often the heart of that invention, but fire alone was not enough. Fire without shelter loses much of its strength to the air. Shelter without fire can become a cold container. Clothing without dryness can betray the body. Bedding without insulation can let frozen ground drink warmth from sleeping flesh. The real achievement was the combination. A low windbreak changes what a fire can do. A hide wall turns smoke and heat into a livable pocket. A floor covered with grass, brush, Skins, moss, or other insulating material separates the body from the earth. Stones placed near flames may hold heat for a short time. Ash can protect embers. Even the shape of an entrance matters, because a doorway facing the wrong wind can turn a shelter into a funnel of cold. What survives in the record suggests surprising sophistication, though the evidence remains incomplete. Many of the most important materials were perishable. Wood rots, hide disappears, sinew decays, snow melts, grass bedding leaves only faint chemical or botanical traces under rare conditions. Archaeologists are often left with hearth stains, post holes, stones, bones, burned sediments, and patterns in the ground where a structure once stood. From these fragments, they infer spaces where people slept, worked, cooked, repaired tools, and waited out weather. The absence of a complete shelter does not mean the absence of architecture, in cold lands especially. Some of humanity's most important buildings may have vanished almost completely. Caves offered one answer, but not a simple one. Popular imagination often places ancient people permanently inside caves, as if caves were natural houses waiting for human families. In reality, caves were uneven gifts. Some were damp, smoky, dangerous, too deep, too exposed, or already occupied by bears, hyenas, wolves, or other animals. Some had good entrances that caught morning light or blocked prevailing wind. Others were freezing traps. A cave could protect from snow and wind, but it could also hold cold air, limit visibility, and fill with smoke if fire was poorly placed. Ancient people used caves when they were useful, but they were not merely cave dwellers. Much of life unfolded outside, in temporary camps, open-air sites, river valleys, hunting stations, and shelters that left only faint traces. On the open plains, people had to build warmth from the bodies of animals and the shape of the land. Mammoth bones, tusks, antlers, stones, and hides could be used to create frames and walls. Some Upper Paleolithic sites in Eastern Europe contain remarkable mammoth bone structures, with large bones arranged in circular or oval plans. Scholars still debate exactly how all of these structures functioned, how often they were occupied, and whether some had symbolic as well as practical meanings. But they show that people could build substantial shelters in cold environments with limited wood. A mammoth was not only hunted or scavenged for meat, its remains could become architecture, fuel, tools, and memory made solid. There is a surprising detail in some cold region sites. Bones themselves may have been burned as fuel. In open steppe tundra, wood could be scarce, and animal bone, especially when rich in grease, can burn under certain conditions. It is not as simple or efficient as dry wood, and scholars still debate how common the practice was in different places, but burned bone accumulations suggest that people sometimes turn the dead animal into heat in yet another way. The same creature could feed the body, cover the body, arm the hunter, frame the shelter, and warm the night in endless snow. Usefulness had many layers. The design of shelter also had to account for smoke. Fire gives life, but smoke inside an enclosed space can sicken and blind. A shelter that holds too much smoke becomes unbearable. One that vents too freely loses heat. Ancient builders had to balance airflow with warmth, perhaps using openings, low entrances, hearth placement, and the natural draft of caves or hide structures. This knowledge would have been practical, learned through experience rather than theory. A child raised around such structures would learn where to sit, where smoke gathered, how to adjust coverings, when to feed the fire, and when a change in wind made the whole camp uncomfortable. None of this appears dramatically in the archaeological record, yet it shaped every winter night. Bedding may have been one of the quietest revolutions of cold survival. The ground is a thief, even inside a shelter, even beside a fire. Lying directly on frozen soil or stone can drain warmth quickly. A layer of hides, plant material, brush, moss, or fur changes the equation. It creates trapped air. It lifts the sleeper away from cold surfaces. It softens pressure on tired bodies. Evidence for ancient bedding is rare, because such materials decay. But where preservation allows glimpses of plant bedding in prehistoric contexts, it reminds us that comfort and survival were often the same thing. A bed was not a luxury, it was insulation. The making of warmth began long before a storm. Hides had to be cleaned, scraped, dried, softened, and repaired. A stiff hide might block wind but fail as clothing or bedding. A rotten hide could tear. Sinew had to be processed into thread. Needles and awls had to be shaped. Fuel had to be gathered when available, not when desperately needed. Camps had to be placed with wind, drainage, visibility, and access in mind. A shelter too near a river might flood or expose people to damp cold. A shelter too far from water required more labour. A shelter in a hollow might be protected from wind but collect cold air. These decisions show how survival was made through judgment, not just materials. The fire itself required a chain of care. Starting a fire in severe cold is much harder than maintaining one. Dry tinder may be scarce, fingers may be numb, wind may scatter sparks, snow may wet fuel. For many ancient groups, preserving embers may have been easier than creating flame from nothing each time. Coals buried in ash can remain alive for hours under the right conditions. A carried ember, protected in suitable material, could move warmth from one camp to the next. The evidence for exactly how early people transported fire is limited, but ethnographic parallels and practical logic suggest that protecting fire was often crucial. Losing fire in deep cold was not inconvenient. It could be disastrous. Warmth also gathered people socially. Around the hearth, tasks overlapped, meat cooked, fat rendered, tools dried, clothing repaired, children slept, stories, warnings, and root memories could be passed on. The hearth made time usable after dark, allowing work that the cold day did not permit. Firelight extended human activity into the long night, but it also created a centre. In a frozen landscape where space was dangerous, the hearth marked a small circle of belonging. No single explanation fully accounts for why humans endured so successfully in cold regions. But the social life of warmth must have mattered. People did not merely heat themselves beside fire, they organized themselves around it. There is also a symbolic dimension that cannot be fully recovered. Hearths were repeated places. Some sites show evidence of people returning to the same locations across long periods. A good camp was remembered, perhaps named, perhaps associated with successful hunts, births, deaths, storms, or encounters with other groups. Fireplaces may have carried meaning beyond function. The record does not allow certainty, but it is difficult to imagine that the centre of warmth, food, light, and safety remained emotionally neutral. In the cold, fire was not only technology, it was the difference between an outside that could kill and an inside that could hold life together. The invention of warmth was therefore not one discovery but a system of small, disciplined acts. A hide pulled tighter before wind rises. A child moved closer to the centre, a coal covered carefully in ash, a seam repaired before it splits, a shelter entrance turned away from the storm, greasy bone added to a fire when wood runs low, bedding dried when the sun appears. These gestures do not sound grand, but they are the grammar of survival. Ancient people survived endless snow by mastering this grammar so completely that much of it became routine. And yet every routine remained vulnerable. A storm could tear a shelter, damp could ruin fuel, smoke could force people outside, a fire could die, a camp could be abandoned because the surrounding land no longer offered enough food. Warmth had to be remade because it was never secure. That is what makes the achievement so striking. Ancient people did not find comfort waiting for them in the frozen world. They assembled it from animals, plants, stones, fire, memory, and cooperation. In a landscape of white distance and dark cold, they created small interiors where human life could continue. The snow pressed against the walls. The wind searched for openings. Inside, the hearth glowed, and for another night, the fragile climate of the human body survived. Food moved through the frozen world before people did. Long before a hunting group stepped out from a shelter and crossed the snow, the herds had already begun writing their own map across the land. Reindeer, horse, bison, mammoth, musk ox, wild sheep, ibex, and other animals did not wander randomly through cold landscapes. They followed grazing, wind-scoured ridges, river valleys, seasonal crossings, breeding grounds, salt licks, sheltered basins, and old routes older than any human memory. To survive beneath white skies, ancient people had to learn these routes with extraordinary patience. A hunter did not simply look for an animal. He looked for the pattern that made an animal likely to appear at a certain place, under a certain sky, at a certain point in the season. Snow made hunting harder, but it also made the land speak more clearly. Tracks remained where feet pressed into powder or cracked the crust. Droppings revealed freshness, diet, and direction. Scraped snow showed where animals had reached buried plants, broken branches, trampled sedges, exposed soil, feathers, blood, hair caught on shrubs, and the narrow trails of predators all became part of a moving archive. A modern person might see only whiteness and silence. Ancient hunters saw time. A track was not merely a mark. It was an animal that had passed recently, perhaps tired, perhaps wounded, perhaps part of a larger herd, perhaps heading toward a known crossing. What survives in the record suggests that this reading of the land was central to Ice Age survival, though the knowledge itself has vanished except where tools, bones, and camps reveal its consequences. The hunt began with attention to energy. In severe cold, chasing blindly could be ruinous. Every step through snow cost strength. A hunter who exhausted himself before the kill might become the one needing rescue. Ancient people likely favored strategies that used landscape and cooperation driving animals toward narrow passages, waiting near crossings, ambushing along migration routes, or exploiting places where snow, mud, ice, or terrain slowed prey. Cliffs, riverbanks, marshy ground, ravines, and natural funnels could turn animal movement into human opportunity. Scholars still debate the details of many prehistoric hunting sites, because bones alone do not always reveal whether animals were actively hunted, scavenged, trapped, or killed by natural events before humans arrived. But repeated patterns of cut marks, tool damage, and selective transport show that ancient people knew how to make large animals into food with planning rather than luck alone. Large animals were valuable, but they were also dangerous. A mammoth was not simply a walking storehouse of meat. It was a massive, intelligent, social creature capable of crushing a careless hunter. Bison could gore, horses could kick, reindeer could scatter suddenly and leave a group empty-handed. Even a wounded animal could kill. Hunting in cold environments required weapons, coordination, timing, and restraint. Stone points, spears, thrusting weapons, throwing spears, later spear throwers, and carefully prepared blades all played roles in different times and places. Yet technology was only part of the answer. A spear is powerful only when used at the right distance, against the right target, by people who know what happens after the animal bolts, falls, or fights. One lesser-known detail of cold hunting is that the kill was only the beginning of the labour. A large carcass in freezing conditions could preserve itself for a time, but it could also become dangerously difficult to process. Meat might stiffen, fat could harden, hands could numb while cutting. Predators might arrive quickly, drawn by blood and scent. A group had to decide what to butcher on sight, what to carry, what to cache, and what to abandon. Heavy bones with marrow might be worth the effort. Hides needed removal before they froze too hard. Organs had to be used quickly. In some cases, people may have established camps near kill sites because carrying an entire animal back was impossible. In others, they transported high-value parts to more protected locations. The archaeological record, with its scattered bones and cut marks, often captures these decisions after the fact, like the remains of an ancient calculation. Cold changed the value of time after a kill. In warm climates, meat spoils quickly, forcing rapid consumption, drying, smoking, or sharing. In freezing weather, natural cold could slow decay, effectively turning the landscape into a storage chamber. But this did not make food security simple. Frozen meat had to be protected from scavengers. It had to be remembered under snow. It had to be cut or thawed enough to use. A cache could save lives if a storm trapped a group. But it could also be stolen by wolves, foxes, bears, or other humans. No single explanation fully accounts for how widespread ancient catching practices were in every region. But the logic is strong, and ethnographic parallels show how vital stored food can be in cold environments. A buried reserve might mean the difference between a hungry night and a fatal one. The animals themselves offered more than calories. Tendons became cordage and thread. Bone became points, needles, handles, wedges, and fuel. Antler became tools. Horn, hide, hoof, stomach, bladder, and sinew all had uses. Fat could feed fires, soften hides, and nourish bodies. Teeth and claws could become ornaments. This full use of animal bodies reveals a way of thinking that modern people often miss. Ancient hunters were not merely meat collectors, they were specialists in transformation. A reindeer could become clothing, shelter covering, sewing thread, food, containers, and tools. A mammoth could become architecture. A seal in Arctic or coastal environments could become oil, meat, hide, and waterproof material. In cold lands, the boundary between hunting and engineering almost disappeared. Small animals mattered too, though they are often less dramatic in the imagination. Hares, birds, fish, foxes, rodents, and seasonal eggs could supplement diets. Fish under ice could be taken where people had the tools and knowledge. Birds might gather near open water or carcasses. Traps and snares, though made from perishable materials and rarely preserved, may have been important. The evidence remains incomplete because wood, fibre, and sinew traps disappear easily. But it would be surprising if ancient people ignored such possibilities. A snare works while a hunter sleeps. A fish trap can gather food without a dangerous chase. In a frozen world where energy mattered, passive hunting methods could be profoundly valuable. The social side of hunting was equally important. A large animal kill produced more food than one person or a small family could easily consume before loss, especially if preservation was uncertain. Sharing reduced risk. Today, one hunter succeeds, tomorrow, another fails. A group that shares can survive uneven luck better than isolated individuals. This does not mean ancient communities were perfectly harmonious. Food creates tension as well as cooperation. Decisions about who receives fat, marrow, meat, hides, and tools may have carried social meaning. The record cannot reveal every rule, but the repeated survival of groups in hard climates suggests that sharing systems, whether formal or informal, were essential. Women, men, elders, and adolescents likely contributed to food in varied ways depending on culture, season, age, skill, and environment. Popular images often reduce Ice Age survival to male hunters chasing mammoths, but that is far too narrow. Processing hides, making clothing, gathering plant foods where available, collecting fuel, maintaining camps, trapping small animals, preparing food, caring for children, and preserving knowledge were all part of the food system. In cold environments. The hunt could fail even after the animal was killed if no one could process the body. Dry the hide, repair the clothing, feed the fire, or care for those waiting in camp. The spear in the snow was only one visible point of a much larger human network. There were also seasons when hunting became a matter of following absence. Herds moved away, snow deepened, storms closed routes, animals became lean, rivers froze or broke unpredictably. During these times, ancient people may have relied more heavily on stored food, cached fat, marrow, fish, scavenged carcasses, or movement toward more reliable resources. Coastal and riverine environments could offer alternatives where inland hunting failed. Some groups may have timed their movements to meet animal migrations, while others stayed near dependable winter resources. Scholars still debate how flexible different populations were, and the answer likely varied widely. There was no single Ice Age survival strategy. There were many, each tuned to place. Hunting beneath white skies also carried a psychological burden. A storm could hide a herd that was close. A wrong guess could waste a day of strength. A hungry group might become more willing to take dangerous risks. Tracks could deceive if wind reshaped them. A predator's trail might lead to a carcass, or to danger. The ancient hunter had to balance hope against caution. That balance may be one of the least visible but most important skills of all. To survive the snow, people had to act decisively without becoming reckless. They had to wait without becoming passive. They had to know when a faint sign was worth following and when the land was offering only exhaustion. At the edge of a successful hunt, the frozen world briefly changed character. The white emptiness filled with work. People cut, carried, scraped, broke, warmed, guarded, and divided. Steam rose from fresh meat into cold air. Red stained the snow. Ravens and foxes watched from a distance. Children may have learned by seeing which bones were opened, which fat was saved, which hide cuts mattered, which tools dulled fastest. Nothing was wasted without thought. The animal's death became a temporary defense against winter, but only if human hands could transform it quickly enough. This is why hunting in endless snow was never just violence against animals. It was a relationship with migration, weather, landscape, risk, and memory. Ancient people survived because they knew that food was always moving, always seasonal, always uncertain. They followed the herds, but they also followed the signs beneath the signs: wind direction, snow texture, animal condition, predator behavior, the remembered timing of past years, beneath white skies. Every meal carried the labor of observation. Every track might become a story of survival, and every successful return to the hearth proved, for one more night, that humans had learned to read life moving through the cold. Fire in the frozen world was never just fire. It was a boundary. On one side of it lay the open dark, the wind, the hard snow, the eyes of animals, and the slow danger of a body cooling beyond rescue. On the other side lay a circle of light where hands could work, food could soften, children could sleep, and the group could remain something more than scattered bodies hiding from winter. The flame did not remove fear, but it gave fear an edge. It marked the place where the night stopped advancing for a little while. Ancient people had known fire long before the coldest worlds became their great test, but in endless snow, fire changed in importance. It was no longer only a tool for cooking or protection. It became a form of stored life. A burning hearth turned frozen meat into edible food, melted snow into water, hardened wood and bone for tools, dried damp clothing, softened hides, and held predators at a cautious distance. It allowed people to make use of the long darkness rather than surrendering every hour after sunset. What survives in the record suggests that fire use was widespread and deeply integrated into human life. Though scholars still debate when different human groups learned to create fire reliably, rather than only maintain it from natural sources, the evidence remains incomplete because ash scatters, hearths erode, and later fires can confuse older traces. In the cold, starting fire from nothing could be difficult enough to make preservation essential. Dry tinder was precious. Wind could steal sparks. Snow could soak fuel. Numb hands could fail at the delicate work of friction, striking or tending a small ember into flame. A group that already had fire might protect it with the care later peoples reserved for treasure. Coals buried beneath ash can remain alive if handled well. Embers can be carried in suitable containers or wrapped in slow-burning material, though direct evidence from deep prehistory is rare. No single explanation fully accounts for every method used, but practical logic points to one truth: losing fire at the wrong moment could turn a survivable night into a crisis. The hearth itself was a piece of technology. Its placement mattered. Too exposed, and the wind devoured heat. Too enclosed, and smoke gathered until eyes burned and lungs suffered. In caves, smoke might travel along ceilings, settle in chambers, or escape through cracks depending on shape and airflow. In tents or hide shelters, the opening above or near the hearth had to release smoke without surrendering all warmth. Stones could hold a fire in place, reflect heat, or support cooking. Ash could insulate coals. Burned bone could supplement scarce wood. Around the hearth, ancient people learned an architecture of flame, one that rarely survives in full, but can sometimes be glimpsed in fire-reddened sediment, charcoal, cracked stone, and burned animal remains. Cooking changed cold survival in quiet but powerful ways. Heat made tough meat easier to chew and digest. It helped extract nutrients from bones and connective tissue. It made some plant foods safer or more useful where such foods were available. It reduced the energy the body needed to process food, which mattered deeply when every calorie had to serve warmth and movement. In cold environments, a hot meal was not merely comforting. It could restore strength faster than frozen or raw food. Broth, rendered fat, roasted marrow, warmed organs, and softened meat may have been among the ancient answers to exhaustion. The exact recipes are lost, but the logic of cooking in the cold is clear. Fire also made water possible. Snow surrounds people in frozen landscapes, yet snow is not automatically drinkable in the way a stream is. Eating snow can chill the body and does not provide much water for its volume. Melting it requires heat, containers, stones, hides, bark, or other methods suited to the available materials. A hearth allowed people to turn the landscape's frozen abundance into liquid survival. This detail is easy to overlook because snow appears to solve thirst at a glance. In reality, water in winter could demand fuel, time, and planning. A group short of fuel could face dehydration in a world made of ice. The flame protected tools as well as bodies. Stone points could be repaired by firelight. Wooden shafts could be dried and straightened. Hides could be smoked, softened, or dried near warmth, though too much heat could damage them. Sinew could be prepared. Adhesives made from resins, gums, or other substances could be warmed and applied. A cold hand cannot do fine work for long, but fire extended the working life of fingers. It made the shelter into a workshop, and the workshop into a shield against tomorrow's dangers. A spear repaired at night might bring food the next day. A boot dried before sleep might save a foot in the morning. Around fire, knowledge became easier to preserve. Long winter nights gave time for teaching. Children could watch adults shape stone, scrape hides, twist fibers, tend embers, butcher meat, and prepare clothing. Elders could pass on remembered routes and storm signs. The hearth gathered the group into listening distance. This does not mean ancient nights were peaceful in any simple sense. Smoke stung, hunger remained, wind pressed against shelter walls. But fire created the conditions for memory to move from one generation to the next. What survives in the record suggests skill. What does not survive is the voice of instruction. Fire likely carried both. Predators understood fire too. Wolves, hyenas, bears, and big cats did not vanish simply because humans had flames. But fire changed the balance. It made a camp more visible, more dangerous to approach, and more strongly marked by human presence. A hearth could protect a carcass during butchery, or discourage scavengers at the edge of camp. Yet fire also advertised location. Smoke could be seen. Light could be noticed. Smell carried. Ancient people had to balance protection against exposure. In some places, the glow of a hearth may have signalled safety to allies or rivals alike. Scholars still debate how often Ice Age groups encountered one another in cold landscapes, but fire would have made human occupation legible from a distance. There was fragility in this power. Fire needed feeding. It could not be ignored. A person had to judge which fuel burned hot, which smoked badly, which lasted, which sparked, which was too wet, which bones still held grease. In wood-poor regions, fuel choice could shape camp location as much as water or hunting did. People might collect shrubs, driftwood, dung, bone, peat, or whatever the environment allowed. Some fuels warmed poorly but were better than nothing. Others were valuable enough to gather in advance. The hearth was therefore connected to the wider landscape by invisible paths of labour. Every flame had a history of gathering behind it. Fire also changed emotion. It made a small sun where the real sun had fallen or vanished behind storm. It gave colour to faces in a world of blue-white cold. It made shadows move across cave walls and hide coverings. It turned raw places into inhabited places. Ancient people may have marked hearths with repeated use, returning to old fire spots, building new fires over old ash, or arranging activity around the warmth in patterns that archaeologists can sometimes detect. The evidence remains incomplete, but it is difficult to imagine fire as purely practical. It was too central to hunger, safety, labour, sleep, teaching, and death. In some ancient sites, hearths appear again and again through layers of occupation, like pulses of human presence in the ground. Each layer may represent people who came, burned fuel, cooked food, repaired tools, slept, and moved on. The individuals are gone, but the ash remains as a dark signature. A hearth is one of archaeology's most intimate traces because it marks not only that humans were there, but that they paused, they made a centre, they transformed cold space into living space. Against the dark, then, fire was both practical and symbolic, though the symbolic part can only be approached carefully. It was light in a season of long nights, heat in a climate of loss, and continuity in a mobile life. A carried ember linked one camp to another. A banked coal linked evening to morning. A repeated hearth linked ancestors to descendants through habit and memory. No flame lasted forever, but the practice of keeping flame alive could last across thousands of years. So when ancient people crouched around a fire while snow moved outside, they were not merely warming themselves, they were maintaining a fragile alliance between body, tool, animal, shelter, and memory. The fire cooked the hunt, dried the clothing, softened the hide, guarded the child, lit the hands, and marked the boundary of the human world. Beyond it, the frozen night remained immense. Inside its glow, people could plan the next day, repair what had torn, remember what had happened, and carry warmth forward. The fire did not defeat winter, it made winter survivable, one guarded ember at a time. Clothing was shelter that moved with the body. In a frozen landscape, this may have been one of the greatest differences between survival and disappearance. A cave could not follow a hunting party across a valley. A hearth could not walk beside a person through blowing snow. But a well-made layer of hide, fur, sinew, and shaped covering could carry a small pocket of warmth over the skin, hour after hour, step after step. Ancient people survived the cold not by becoming naturally furred animals, but by learning to borrow the bodies of the animals around them. The earliest clothing leaves little direct evidence because skins, fibres, and sinew decay easily. What remains are indirect clues, hide-scraping tools, bone awls, eyed needles, wear marks, cut marks on animal bones, and the distribution of species whose hides were useful. Scholars still debate exactly when fitted clothing became widespread, but in severe Ice Age environments, simple draped skins would not have been enough for long. A loose hide can warm a resting body near fire, yet deep cold demands sleeves, leggings, hoods, foot coverings, seams, overlaps, and repairs. Wind finds gaps, snow enters loose openings, movement tears weak edges. The evidence remains incomplete, but the existence of fine bone needles strongly suggests that people were making garments far more sophisticated than rough animal wraps. The process began with death, but it did not end with butchery. A killed animal became a sequence of tasks. The hide had to be removed carefully, because careless cuts weakened it. Flesh and fat had to be scraped away. The skin had to be dried, stretched, softened, smoked, worked, and sometimes treated with fat or other materials to keep it flexible. Fur might be left on for insulation or removed for other uses. Sinew could be separated, dried, split, and twisted into thread. Bone could become needles and awls. Antler could become pressure tools or handles. In this way, clothing was not a single object. It was the result of a long collaboration between hunters, hide workers, tool makers, fire tenders, and those who knew how a garment should fit a moving body. One surprising detail is that sewing may have transformed human geography. Without tailored clothing, many cold regions would have been difficult or impossible to occupy for long. A fitted garment traps warm air close to the body while allowing movement. Mittens preserve fingers better than open coverings. Boots separate feet from frozen ground. Hoods protect the head and neck, where heat loss and frostbite can be serious. Layering allows people to adjust to work, rest, wind, and shelter. In this sense, the needle was as important as the spear. The spear brought food, but the needle helped people remain alive long enough to hunt again. Ancient clothing also had to solve the problem of moisture. Snow melts against warmth. Sweat gathers during movement. Damp fur loses insulating power. Wet foot coverings can freeze. A person walking hard through snow might become hot under heavy garments, only to become dangerously cold when stopping. This meant clothing needed management, not merely possession. People had to loosen layers during exertion, dry garments near fire, brush away snow before it melted, repair holes quickly, and protect footwear from soaking. These habits are rarely visible archaeologically, but they must have been learned with care. In endless snow, the body and clothing formed one system. Mismanage one, and the other failed. Footwear may have been especially critical. Feet are the body's contact with the frozen earth, and frozen ground steals warmth relentlessly. Bare feet, or poorly covered feet, would limit movement and risk injury. Boots or moccasin-like coverings made from hide and fur could be stuffed with grass, moss, hair, or other insulating material. Soles had to resist wear. Bindings had to hold without cutting circulation. Snowshoes or other aids may have existed in some form in later prehistoric cold environments, though direct evidence is rare because wood and rawhide vanish so easily. What survives in the record suggests adaptation, but much of the most practical winter technology may have disappeared precisely because it was made from perishable materials. Clothing could also carry identity. Even garments built for survival might be decorated, shaped, coloured, or marked. Shells, beads, teeth, ochre, and pendants found at some Ice Age sites suggest that people did not abandon beauty in cold landscapes. This is important because it prevents a narrow view of ancient survival. The people who made winter clothing were not only solving thermal problems, they were maintaining social worlds. A decorated hood, a carefully placed bead, a fox tooth ornament, or pigment on hide may have signalled group belonging, age, skill, memory, or something modern observers cannot fully recover. No single explanation fully accounts for the meaning of such objects, but their presence shows that survival and symbolism were not separate worlds. The work of making clothing likely structured daily life. Hides had to be processed before they spoiled or froze in unusable shapes. Sewing required light, warmth, patience, and skilled hands. Needles broke, threads snapped, seams wore out, children grew. Hunters damaged clothing during travel and butchery. Wet garments needed drying. Fur became matted. Boots needed constant repair. A community without clothing maintenance was a community moving toward danger. This labour may not look dramatic beside a mammoth hunt, but in practical terms it was just as necessary. A hunter in torn boots might not reach the herd. A child without warm wrapping might not survive the night. A group with no one skilled in hides might find itself surrounded by animals and still unable to live in the cold. There is a hidden intelligence in the choice of animal skins. Different animals provide different qualities. Reindeer hide can be highly insulating. Fox fur may suit trim or smaller coverings. Hare skins can be light and warm but fragile. Seal skin in coastal Arctic settings can resist water in ways inland hides cannot. Large herbivore hides may serve as shelter covers or bedding. The best material depends on the task: sleeping, walking, hunting, carrying, sitting near fire, blocking wind, or protecting hands. Ancient people had to know these differences through use. The record may show species bones, but behind those bones lay decisions about texture, warmth, durability, and season. The phrase clothing from the dead sounds grim, yet in the ancient frozen world it describes a deep transformation. Death did not end an animal's presence in human life. The animal continued as warmth around shoulders, protection under feet, thread through seams, shelter above sleeping children, and bedding beside the fire. This continuity may have shaped how people understood the creatures they depended on. It is difficult to prove ancient beliefs from material remains alone, and scholars still debate the spiritual lives of Ice Age hunters, but repeated use of animal parts in food, clothing, tools, ornaments, and shelter suggests a relationship far more complex than simple consumption. A finished garment carried many past moments within it: the hunt or scavenging event, the butchery, the scraping, the smoke, the drying, the softening by hand, the needle passing through hide, the fitting to a body, the repair after a storm, the smell of hearth smoke embedded in fur. Each layer was memory made wearable, and because clothing moved with the person, it allowed humans to extend their range beyond the fixed circle of camp. The warm shelter of the group could be partly carried into the open, not perfectly, never safely enough to ignore danger, but enough to make travel possible. Cold weather clothing also changed hunting itself. A person who could remain still in freezing air could wait near a crossing. A person whose hands stayed functional could grip a weapon. A person whose feet stayed warm could follow tracks farther. A person whose face was shielded could watch into wind. Clothing did not merely protect after the hunt. It made the hunt possible. It also made migration possible, allowing groups to cross exposed plains, high passes, frozen rivers, and coastal ice zones that would otherwise be too punishing. The archaeological traces of this revolution are small compared with its importance. A bone needle may look delicate beside a mammoth tusk or stone spear point, but it represents an entire world of vanished fabric and fur. It represents design, measurement, repair, planning, and the understanding that human weakness could be answered by making a second skin. The evidence remains incomplete, yet the logic is unavoidable wherever ancient people survived severe snow and cold for long periods. They had mastered clothing at a level that modern imagination often underestimates. So the people moving through the white landscape were not naked figures wrapped in chants. They were dressed in accumulated knowledge. Their sleeves, boots, hoods, bindings, and bedding carried the work of many hands and the bodies of many animals. Each seam held against wind because someone knew how to pierce hide without tearing it. Each layer trapped warmth because someone had learned what fur did when turned inward or outward. Each repair meant another day of movement in the endless snow. Clothing was not an accessory to survival. It was survival made portable, a quiet technology sewn from death so that human life could continue walking through the cold. A home in the frozen world did not always look like a house. Sometimes it was a cave mouth darkened by smoke and guarded by stone. Sometimes it was a hollow behind a ridge where the wind passed overhead instead of through the body. Sometimes it was a frame of bone and hide, a tent held low against the weather, a ring of stones pressing coverings to the ground, or a snow wall shaped not for beauty but for survival. Ancient people could not wait for comfortable places to appear. They had to recognize shelter where the land offered a hint of it, and where the land offered nothing, they had to make shelter from the remains of animals, the memory of past storms, and the invisible shape of the wind. Wind was often the first builder. It decided where snow gathered, where ground stayed bare, where smoke would drift, and where a shelter entrance could safely face. A camp placed badly could become unlivable even with fire and hides. A camp placed well could turn a brutal night into a difficult but survivable one. Ancient people likely read wind through snow ridges, drifting patterns, bent shrubs, exposed stones, and the feel of air moving across the face. What survives in the record suggests careful site choice, but the reasoning behind each choice has to be inferred. Archaeology can show a hearth, a scatter of tools, a bone circle, or an occupation layer. It cannot easily show the moment when someone stood in the cold and decided that this rise, this hollow, this cave entrance, this river bend, would hold life for a while. Caves were useful where they existed, but they were never the whole answer. Some protected people from snow and wind, others trapped dampness, smoke, or cold air. Some were seasonal shelters, some may have been used for work, ritual, butchery, storage, or temporary refuge rather than daily living. The popular image of ancient people as permanent cave dwellers misses the mobility demanded by cold landscapes. Herds moved, fuel ran out, water sources changed. The safest shelter in 1 month could become useless in another. People needed places that could be occupied, abandoned, remembered, and revisited. In that sense, home was not fixed walls. Home was a pattern of return. On the open plains of Ice Age Eurasia, some of the most striking traces are mammoth bone structures. Large bones, tusks, skulls, jaws, and long bones appear arranged in ways that suggest frames or foundations for dwellings, especially in parts of what is now Ukraine and Russia. These sites are extraordinary because they preserve architecture made from animals that once moved through the same cold world. Scholars still debate how each structure was built, how heavily it was covered with hides, how long people occupied it, and whether some arrangements carried symbolic meaning beyond shelter. The evidence remains incomplete, but the basic implication is powerful. Where trees were scarce, ancient people could build with giants. Such structures would not have been simple piles of bones. To make them useful, people had to understand weight, tension, covering, airflow, and stability. Tusks could curve into frames. Large bones could anchor hides. Stones or smaller bones could hold edges down. Snow itself might pile against the outside and add insulation, if controlled rather than allowed to collapse the shelter. A low profile could resist wind better than a tall one. An entrance could be narrowed to reduce heat loss. Inside, hearth placement had to balance warmth with smoke. Bedding had to separate sleepers from the ground. Every part of the shelter was a compromise between materials, weather, labour, and time. Temporary shelters may have been even more common, though far less visible. Hide tents, brush shelters, windbreaks, lean-tos, and snow-supported structures could vanish almost entirely after abandonment. A ring of stones might be all that remains. A stain in the soil might be the ghost of a hearth. A scatter of flakes might mark where tools were repaired during a short stay. This creates a bias in the record. The most durable shelters dominate imagination because they survive. While the everyday structures of mobile life disappear, no single explanation fully accounts for ancient housing in cold environments, because much of it was made from materials designed to be carried, reused, burned, eaten by time, or left to rot. Snow itself could become part of the architecture. It insulates when packed with trapped air, blocks wind when piled into walls, and reveals where a shelter is failing by drifting through gaps. Ancient people living in snowy environments likely learned when to use snow and when to avoid it. A snow wall could protect a fire from gusts. Snow piled against the outside of a hide shelter could reduce drafts. But snow melting near warmth could create dampness. And dampness could become cold's quiet ally. Managing snow around camp required attention. Too much nearby, and movement became difficult. Too little, and water had to be found elsewhere. Even the act of clearing a space could expose frozen ground that then stole heat from bodies unless insulated. The ground beneath a shelter mattered as much as the roof. Frozen earth, stone, or packed snow could drain warmth through bedding and feet. People needed layers hides, brush, grass, moss, reeds, bark, or other materials where available. In some regions, plant bedding is known from prehistoric contexts under rare preservation, reminding us that ancient comfort was often practical intelligence. A soft sleeping surface reduced heat loss and exhaustion. It gave children a safer place to rest. It allowed the injured to recover. The bed was part of the survival system, not a luxury added after survival had already been achieved. A good shelter also organised labour. One area near the hearth might be used for cooking, another for stone tool repair, another for hide work. Meat could hang or lie where it would not be trampled. Wet clothing needed space to dry without burning. Children had to stay away from sparks but close enough to warmth. Dogs, where present in later periods and regions, may have added another layer to camp life, though the timing and role of early domesticated dogs remains debated. The inside of a shelter was not empty space. It was a carefully managed environment where every object had a relationship to heat, smoke, light, and movement. Shelter also shaped social life. In a tight cold-weather dwelling, people had little privacy in the modern sense. Warmth was shared, smoke was shared, hunger was shared, irritation was surely shared too, though the archaeological record is tactfully silent about that. Decisions about who slept closest to the fire, where children lay, how food was divided, and who tended embers may have followed habits and rules that are now lost. What survives in the record suggests cooperation. But cooperation does not mean ease. A winter shelter held warmth, but also tension, grief, teaching, repair, and waiting. Some shelters were probably built for a few nights, others for seasons. Some were hunting camps, placed near animal routes. Others were base camps, where a wider range of tasks occurred. Repeated occupation of certain places suggests that ancient people remembered favourable locations across years or generations. A good shelter site was not just discovered, it became part of inherited geography. Children who survived one winter might return as adults, carrying not a map on skin or stone, but a map in memory where the wind was less cruel, where the ground drained, where fuel could be found, where animals passed, where the old hearth lay under new sediment. The mystery of ancient cold-weather homes lies partly in what is missing. The most important structures may have left almost nothing. The most carefully sewn hide tent may vanish completely. A snow shelter melts without testimony. A windbreak of brush decays. The warmth held inside disappears instantly when abandoned. Archaeologists must reconstruct life from stubborn fragments, and the fragments worn against simple pictures. Ancient people did not live only in caves. They did not live only in bone houses. They did not wander without shelter. They used a flexible range of homes, each fitted to season, landscape, mobility, and need. To face the wind was to understand that shelter is not separation from nature, but negotiation with it. Ancient dwellings did not remove people from the frozen world. They reduced the world to something the body could endure. A hide wall slowed the storm. A bone frame held shape against pressure. A low entrance controlled air. Snow packed along the edge sealed a gap. A hearth turned the interior golden. Beyond the covering, the cold continued unchanged, vast and patient. Inside, people scraped hides, warmed hands, fed children, repaired tools, and slept close enough to hear one another breathing. These homes were temporary in material, but lasting in consequence. They allowed people to stay near herds, cross plains, endure storms, raise children, and carry culture into places where the human body alone could not last. Every shelter was a small argument against exposure. Every windbreak declared that the land's force could be studied and answered. In endless snow, ancient people survived not by finding refuge once, but by making refuge repeatedly. They built with bone, hide, stone, snow, memory, and care, and for as long as the walls held and the hearth remained alive, the frozen world had an inside. To someone unfamiliar with winter landscapes, snow can appear simple. It falls, accumulates, and covers the ground in a uniform layer of white. Yet for the people who lived in frozen worlds, snow was not one thing, it was many things at once. It could be a road, a barrier, a source of water, an insulator, a warning, a hunting clue, a trap, and sometimes a killer. Ancient survival depended not only on enduring snow, but on understanding its countless forms. The difference between safety and danger could be hidden in a subtle change of texture beneath a boot, or a slight shift in how wind shaped a drift. What survives in the record suggests that ancient people became remarkably skilled observers of winter environments. Like later Arctic and subarctic cultures documented in historical times, they likely recognized distinctions in snow that modern urban societies rarely notice. Fresh powder behaved differently from wind-packed crust. Wet snow behaved differently from dry snow. Deep drifts concealed hazards while hard surfaces made travel easier. Snow exposed tracks, preserved movement, and revealed invisible stories in a landscape where food, fuel, and shelter were often separated by great distances. The ability to read snow was as valuable as the ability to make fire. One of snow's greatest gifts was information. A track impressed into fresh snow could reveal not only the presence of an animal, but its size, speed, condition, and direction. A herd moving quickly left a different pattern than one feeding calmly. A limping animal left a different story than a healthy one. Predators created trails of their own. Wolves often travelled efficiently, conserving energy in narrow lines. Foxes zigzagged as they hunted beneath the surface. Birds clustered around carcasses hidden from view. The snow became a vast record book rewritten every day. Ancient hunters did not simply search for animals, they searched for evidence. Wind complicated this reading. A storm could erase hours of information in minutes. Light snow might preserve tracks beautifully, while drifting snow buried them completely. Skilled hunters had to understand not only what a track meant, but how old it was, and how weather had altered it. A fresh footprint partly filled by wind told a different story than one untouched since dawn. Scholars still debate the precise methods used by Ice Age hunters, because such knowledge rarely fossilizes. But ethnographic parallels from northern peoples suggest an extraordinary level of environmental literacy. What appears blank to outsiders often contains immense detail for those who depend upon it. Snow also shaped movement. Deep powder consumed energy. Every step required lifting weight and pushing through resistance. Hard crust, on the other hand, could support a traveller or suddenly break beneath them. Animals faced the same challenges. Reindeer and caribou evolved broad hooves that helped distribute weight. Humans relied on route selection, timing, and perhaps technologies that often leave little trace in archaeology. In some later cold weather societies, snowshoes transformed travel. Whether similar devices existed in some prehistoric contexts remains uncertain because perishable materials rarely survive. The evidence remains incomplete, but it is difficult to imagine ancient people ignoring methods that reduced effort in deep snow. The relationship between snow and hunting was complex. Deep snow could slow prey and favour hunters, yet it could also exhaust the hunters themselves. A weakened animal trapped by drifts might offer an opportunity. Conversely, a herd moving across wind-packed surfaces could outrun people struggling through softer terrain. Snow changed the balance between species, creating advantages that shifted from day to day. Ancient hunters had to understand these changing conditions intimately. Success often depended less on strength than on timing. There was another side to snow that was less obvious but equally important. Snow insulated. Beneath a deep layer, temperatures near the ground can remain significantly warmer than the air above. Small mammals survive winter partly because snow creates a protective layer between them and extreme cold. Ancient people likely recognized this principle even if they never described it scientifically. Snow piled against shelters reduced wind penetration. Snow walls shielded camps. Snow-covered caches protected food from temperature fluctuations. In this way, the same substance that made travel difficult could help preserve life. This hidden warmth beneath snow created strange landscapes. Beneath white surfaces, grasses remained trapped, seeds waited, small animals tunneled, frozen streams continued moving in places. Life persisted under apparent emptiness. Ancient people learned to look beyond the surface. They knew that snow concealed as much as it revealed. A drift might hide a depression deep enough to injure a traveller. A frozen stream might appear solid while water still flowed beneath thin ice. A smooth field might conceal rocks, animal burrows, or dangerous ground. Water itself presented an ongoing challenge. Snow could be melted, but doing so consumed fuel. Eating large amounts of snow directly risked lowering body temperature. Ice required braking and transport. Streams sometimes remained open in moving sections, offering easier access if they could be reached safely. In severe cold, hydration became a hidden concern. The body loses moisture through breath, effort, and dry winter air. Ancient people surrounded by frozen water still had to work to drink. This paradox likely shaped camp placement and fuel use more than modern observers often realize. Snow could also preserve memory. A path walked repeatedly became easier to follow. Animal trails remained visible for days under stable conditions. Campsites acquired familiar approaches. Children learned routes by following traces left by others. In this sense, snow sometimes acted like a temporary map. Yet unlike stone markers or carved signs, it constantly changed. Every storm rewrote the landscape. Ancient survival required adapting to a world that never stayed exactly the same from one week to the next. There is a lesser-known archaeological mystery connected to snow. Many traces of human activity may have vanished precisely because they occurred in snowy environments. Camps built on seasonal snow leave little behind. Travel routes across frozen rivers disappear when the ice melts. Temporary structures made from snow and hide leave almost no direct evidence. This means that archaeologists often see only fragments of winter life, The record is richer for permanent camps than for the journeys connecting them. As a result, some of the most important survival skills ancient people possessed may be among the hardest to reconstruct today. Snow also influenced sound. Fresh snow absorbs noise, creating an eerie quiet. Hard crust reflects sound differently. Wind moving across frozen surfaces carries voices, animal calls, and warnings in unexpected ways. Hunters could approach more quietly under certain conditions or be betrayed by the crunch of ice underfoot. Predators faced the same challenges. Ancient people likely learned how different snow conditions affected hearing and movement. Such knowledge rarely leaves archaeological traces, yet it would have mattered every day. The psychological effects of snow should not be underestimated. Endless white landscapes can distort distance and orientation. Storms erase landmarks. Overcast skies blur the boundary between Earth and horizon. Travellers can lose direction in surprisingly short periods. Ancient groups had to navigate using memory, terrain features, wind patterns, stars when visible, and accumulated experience. A familiar ridge or river valley became invaluable. Knowledge of the land was a defense against disorientation as important as clothing or fire. No single explanation fully accounts for how ancient people mastered snowy environments, because mastery was never complete. The snow always retained the power to surprise. A hidden crevasse, sudden storm, unstable ice sheet, or unexpected thaw could undo careful planning. Yet the evidence suggests that people adapted not by eliminating uncertainty, but by learning to live with it. They watched, they remembered, they compared seasons. They taught children what signs mattered and which dangers could not be ignored. In many ways, snow became a partner in survival. It revealed tracks, it insulated shelters, it preserved food, it marked routes, it warned of approaching weather. It showed where animals had passed. At the same time, it concealed hazards, consumed energy, and punished mistakes. Ancient people survived because they understood both sides of this relationship. They did not see snow merely as an obstacle. They treated it as information. By now, the frozen world is beginning to look different. What first appeared as endless emptiness reveals hidden structure. The land contains roots, clues, shelters, resources, and warnings. The snow itself participates in daily life, shaping decisions at every level. It records movement and erases it. It protects and threatens. It feeds and deceives. And somewhere within this white world, families continue to endure. Children learn to read tracks before they understand the larger geography. Hunters scan wind-swept ridges for signs invisible to strangers. Elders remember winters that brought different conditions and different lessons. Around every camp, the snow holds traces of life for a little while before the next storm arrives and writes a new story across the land. No one survived endless snow alone for very long. The frozen world punished isolation with a quiet efficiency that left little room for pride. A person could be strong, skilled, and brave, yet still need someone else to watch the fire while sleep came, to pull a frozen boot loose, to carry meat, to notice frostbite on a cheek, to remember a safer route when wind erased the path. Ancient survival in cold landscapes was not the story of lone hunters defeating winter. It was the story of groups learning how to keep one another alive when the body, by itself, was not enough. Children made this truth impossible to ignore. A child in a frozen world was not only vulnerable, a child was the future of the group carried in a small, fragile body. Infants needed constant warmth. Toddlers needed protection from fire, frost, thin ice. predators, hunger, and their own curiosity. Older children had to learn quickly, but not too quickly, because a mistake in snow could become permanent. They learned by watching adults read tracks, scrape hides, tend embers, butcher animals, patch seams, collect fuel, and move through dangerous ground. What survives in the record suggests that children were present in many ancient communities, but their daily lives are often faint in archaeology. Small footprints, child-sized objects, and traces of learning sometimes appear, yet most of childhood vanished with the soft materials of ordinary life. In cold environments, care had to be practical and constant. A child wrapped in fur was wrapped in labour, the hunt that provided the hide, the scraping that cleaned it, the sewing that shaped it, the fire that dried it, the adult arms that held it close. Warmth could not be assumed. Food could not be wasted. A crying infant during a storm was not a minor inconvenience, but a sign that the group's most delicate member was under threat. No single explanation fully accounts for how ancient families organized childcare in severe climates, but the basic demands are clear. Someone had to stay near shelter when others hunted. Someone had to share food. Someone had to teach danger before danger taught it more harshly. Elders may have been just as important in a different way. In a landscape where one bad season could decide life or death, memory had value beyond physical strength. An elder might remember a winter when herds failed to arrive, a valley where fuel remained under snow, a cave that smoked badly when the wind turned, a river crossing that looked safe but broke during thaw. The evidence remains incomplete, and not every ancient person lived to old age, but some did. And their knowledge could have carried weight. Survival in endless snow depended on remembering rare events, precisely because rare events could be deadly. A storm that comes once in 10 years is still part of the landscape if someone lives long enough to remember it. The injured and sick reveal another side of ancient cold survival. Some prehistoric remains show individuals who lived for a time after serious injuries or physical limitations, suggesting care by others. These cases must be interpreted carefully, because bones do not preserve every detail of social life, but they challenge the idea that ancient groups simply abandoned anyone who became weak. In severe cold, caring for an injured person cost energy, food, and time, yet humans often did it. That fact suggests bonds deeper than immediate usefulness. It also suggests a practical intelligence the person unable to hunt today might still know how to sew, teach, watch children, tend fire, shape tools, or remember the land. Inside shelters, cooperation became visible in small routines. Someone fed the hearth before it sank too low. Someone moved damp clothing away from sparks. Someone checked stored meat. Someone repaired a seam. Someone soothed a child. Someone listened for wind changes. These actions were not heroic in the dramatic sense, but they formed the structure of survival. A group could fail not only from lack of food, but from broken routines. A neglected ember, a torn boot, a missing binding. A forgotten cache. A child too far from warmth, each small failure could widen into disaster. Social life also reduced risk through sharing. Hunting success was uneven. One family might bring back meat one week and nothing the next. A group that shared food could survive uncertainty better than one divided into isolated households, sharing fat, marrow, hides, tools, and knowledge helped smooth the dangerous irregularity of cold landscapes. This does not mean ancient groups were free of conflict. Hunger sharpens tension, cold shortens patience, decisions about movement, food division, and risk could divide people. Scholars still debate the social organization of many Paleolithic groups, and the evidence cannot give every answer. But repeated human survival in harsh climates strongly suggests that cooperation was not optional. Children also carried culture forward through imitation. A young person watching a tracker read snow learned not only where an animal went, but how to think about evidence. A child watching hide work learned patience, pressure, and sequence. A child near the hearth learned which fuel smoked, which ash held embers, which stones became too hot to touch. Ancient education was not separated from daily labour. It happened through presence, in endless snow. Teaching could not wait for adulthood, because the landscape itself was always examining the young. There may have been play too. It is easy to forget this when speaking of survival, but children play even in hard worlds. They may have made miniature tools, followed animal tracks, shaped snow, chased one another near camp, or practiced adult tasks with small hands. Some small artifacts from prehistoric sites have been interpreted as possible children's learning pieces, though such interpretations remain debated. The evidence is uncertain, but the idea matters. Ancient children were not only burdens, they were learners, observers, and participants in the slow transfer of survival knowledge. Kinship and alliance likely extended beyond a single camp. In difficult environments, wider social networks could provide mates, information, exchange materials, and support during scarcity. Long-distance movement of stone, shells, pigments, and ornaments in Ice Age contexts suggests that groups were not always isolated. They knew of others, met others, traded with others, or at least moved through overlapping worlds. In the cold, a distant relationship might become a lifeline. A group that knew another valley, another route, another people, had more options when local resources failed. No single explanation fully accounts for the pattern of these networks, but the evidence suggests that ancient social worlds could be broader than the small hearth circle. Death, too, shaped the community of the ice. Burials, where they appear, show that ancient people sometimes treated the dead with care. Objects, pigments, or deliberate placement. These practices varied greatly, and many dead were never preserved in ways archaeologists can find. But the presence of burial in some Paleolithic context reminds us that the people who fought cold also carried grief, memory, and meaning. In a frozen world, losing a skilled hunter, hide worker, elder, parent, or child was not only emotional devastation, it could alter the survival balance of the whole group. The dead remained in memory, in lessons, perhaps in stories told near fire when snow closed the night outside. The phrase children of the ice does not mean children born without fear. It means children born into a world where fear had to be taught into wisdom. They learned that snow could hold a track and hide a hole. They learned that fire was beautiful and dangerous. They learned that animals gave food but could kill. They learned that warmth was made by many hands. They learned that no one ate alone without consequence, and no one survived alone without luck too thin to trust. By this point, the frozen world reveals its deepest survival secret. The essential technology was not only stone, bone, hide, or flame. It was the group itself. Human beings became cold adapted not by growing fur, but by binding themselves into communities that could remember, divide labour, protect weakness, and multiply skill. The body's warmth was guarded by clothing, but life's continuity was guarded by care. In endless snow, ancient people survived because they became each other's shelter. The ground keeps what it can and loses almost everything else, This is the first frustration of trying to understand ancient people in endless snow. The most important parts of their lives were often made from materials that time devours. Hide rots, sinew disappears, wood decays, snow melts. Spoken warnings vanish the instant the last person who remembers them is gone. What remains are harder things: stone blades, broken bones, charcoal, hearth stains, carved antler, bone needles, post holes, pigments, footprints hardened by accident, and the strange arrangements of objects left behind when people moved on or never returned. From these fragments, archaeologists try to rebuild entire winters. The clues can be remarkably intimate. A hearth stain in a cave floor tells of repeated fire. A cluster of stone flakes shows where someone sat and repaired a tool. A bone split lengthwise suggests marrow extraction. Cut marks reveal the angle of a blade moving through flesh or tendon. Burned bone may hint at cooking, fuel, or disposal. A needle carved from bone suggests fitted clothing, and fitted clothing suggests journeys through cold that loose skins could not easily allow. What survives in the record suggests intelligence everywhere, but the evidence remains incomplete. It gives outlines, not full voices. Footprints are among the most haunting traces because they preserve movement itself. In rare places, ancient tracks remain sealed in sediment, ash, or hardened mud, showing adults and children crossing landscapes that later vanished. They can reveal group size, direction, pace, and sometimes hesitation or return. A footprint is not an object made for display. It is an accident of survival, a moment pressed into earth and rescued by chance. Scholars still debate the interpretation and dating of some trackways, but when they are secure, they remind us that prehistory was not abstract. People walked, slipped, carried, followed, and waited. Cold region sites often contain another kind of clue absence. A camp may show butchery, but no shelter remains. A cave may preserve tools, but not the clothing worn inside it. A bone circle may suggest architecture, but not the exact shape of the hide covering. This absence is not emptiness. It is the shadow of lost material. The archaeological imagination must be careful here. Too little caution produces fantasy. Too much caution can make ancient people seem less capable than they were. The best reading stays between those extremes, grounded in evidence while recognizing how much evidence cold weather life has failed to preserve. Some of the strangest clues are mammoth bone structures, where massive remains form deliberate patterns on the old ground surface. These places suggest planning, repeated labour, and deep familiarity with large animal bodies. Yet no single explanation fully accounts for every example. Were all of them dwellings? Were some storage places, windbreaks, ritual spaces, or mixed-use structures? How much of the bone came from hunting, scavenging, or collecting older remains? The answers differ by site, and scholars still debate them. But whatever their exact purpose, they show that ancient people in frozen landscapes could transform a world with few trees into one with walls. Tools also carry clues of movement. Stone found far from its source reveals travel, exchange, or shared territories. A small blade made from distant flint may imply routes that crossed rivers, valleys, or open plains. Shells and pigments carried over long distances suggest that survival was not purely local. People in the cold were connected to wider worlds, even when separated by snow and danger. These materials are quiet evidence of social geography. A group might be living under a harsh sky, but its knowledge and relationships could extend far beyond the visible horizon. Hearths reveal repeated decisions. Their placement shows where people chose to gather heat and light. Their contents reveal fuel and food. Charcoal can identify burned wood when preservation allows. Burned bones can suggest scarcity of wood or particular cooking practices. Fire-cracked stones show heating and cooling. Layers of ash show return. A hearth is one of the clearest signs that a place became briefly human, not merely visited but inhabited. Yet even hearths can mislead if disturbed, mixed, or poorly dated. The frozen past must be read patiently. Animal bones are among the richest records. They show which species people used, which parts were transported, how carcasses were processed, and sometimes what season an animal died. Teeth can reveal age, antlers can reveal seasonal timing, cut marks, percussion marks, and burning patterns show human action. But bones also raise hard questions. Did humans kill the animal, scavenge it, or use a carcass left by predators or natural death? Were they targeting prime adults, weak individuals, or whatever the season offered? The evidence may point strongly in one direction, but uncertainty often remains. Ancient survival was opportunistic as well as planned. Then there are the personal objects, the ones that make the cold world feel suddenly close. Beads, pendants, ochre, carved fragments, decorated tools. These objects are not always easy to interpret, but they suggest that ancient people carried beauty and meaning into the snow. A community fighting cold still made time for ornament, identity, and memory. This is a surprising detail only if survival is imagined too narrowly. In reality, meaning may have helped people endure. A decorated object could mark belonging, skill, exchange, status, or belief. The precise meaning is often lost, but its presence matters. The ground also records hardship in human bones. Skeletal remains can show injury, disease, nutritional stress, heavy labor, and sometimes survival after trauma. They do not tell complete biographies, but they reveal that ancient bodies paid a price for life in hard environments. Strong muscles leave marks, repeated strange shapes bones, teeth record diet and stress. Healed injuries suggest care. Unhealed injuries may hint at death. The evidence remains incomplete and often rare. But each skeleton is a reminder that adaptation was not effortless. Survival left marks. One of the great problems is that the cold itself moved. Ice sheets advanced, retreated, scraped, buried, crushed, and erased. Rivers cut through old sites. Rising seas drowned coastal camps. Wind scattered light materials. Later humans disturbed earlier layers. Many places where ancient cold weather life unfolded are gone or hidden beyond easy reach. This means the record is not a complete archive. It is a damaged archive, one preserved unevenly by accident. The missing evidence may be as important as the evidence found. Even so, the traces are enough to overturn the old image of ancient people as barely surviving by instinct. The record shows planning, skilled hunting, long-distance movement, complex clothing, shelter construction, fire control, symbolic behavior, and social care. It shows people who knew how to live where modern humans would struggle without equipment. It also shows mystery. Not every site fits neatly. Not every tool's purpose is certain. Not every migration route is known. Not every disappearance can be explained. The strange clues in the ground therefore do more than answer questions. They deepen them. A needle asks what garment vanished. A hearth asks who warmed hands beside it. A child's footprint asks where the group was going. A mammoth bone ring asks how people imagined shelter on an open plain. A distant stone asks who carried it and why. Each object is small, but together they reveal a world of decisions made under pressure. Ancient people survived endless snow, and the ground remembers this imperfectly. It remembers the hard edges of their lives, the things that resisted decay. It does not remember the full softness of fur bedding, the smell of smoke in clothing, the spoken warning before a storm, the hands teaching a child how to follow tracks. Yet enough remains to show that these people were not lost in the cold. They were reading it, building against it, feeding from it, and leaving behind, almost unwillingly, the scattered proof that human life had learned to burn, sow, hunt, remember, and endure beneath the snow. The frozen world depended on animals, and that made it vulnerable in ways ancient people could not fully control. A community might know the snow, protect fire, sew warm clothing, build shelter, and remember every safe crossing, yet still face hunger if the herds failed. The great animals of the Ice Age were not background scenery. They were the moving foundation of many human lives: mammoth, horse, reindeer, bison, musk ox, wild cattle, woolly rhinoceros, saiga antelope, and many others carried energy through the cold landscape in the form of meat, fat, hide, bone, sinew, and movement. When their patterns changed, the human world changed with them. At first, the steppe tundra seems almost unbelievably rich. Across huge parts of northern Eurasia and Beringia, cold open grasslands supported large grazing animals in numbers that can surprise modern observers. These were not endless forests buried under snow, but wide, dry, wind-shaped landscapes where grasses and hardy plants fed herds adapted to cold. Yet this abundance was never guaranteed. It depended on climate, vegetation, season, migration, and the delicate balance between animals and the land beneath them. A wetter period, a warmer shift, deeper snow, changing plant communities, or expanding forests could alter everything. What survives in the record suggests that ancient people tracked these changes closely, but the evidence remains incomplete because the most decisive failures may have left no camp behind. As the last ice age began to loosen, many animal worlds started to change. Some species shifted ranges, some declined, some vanished entirely. The extinction of many large mammals near the end of the Pleistocene remains one of the great debates in archaeology and paleontology. Climate change clearly played a major role in transforming habitats, but human hunting may also have contributed in some regions and for some species. Scholars still debate the balance between climate pressure, human impact, disease, ecological change, and regional timing. No single explanation fully accounts for every extinction everywhere. The end of the mammoth in one place may not have followed the same path as the disappearance of giant ground sloths or horses in another. For ancient people living through these changes, the debate would not have existed as theory. It would have appeared as absence. A herd that once arrived late in the cold season might arrive thin, late, or not at all. A valley known for grazing might fill with shrubs or forest. Animals adapted to open cold steppe might retreat as the land warmed and changed. Reindeer might still be found, but in different places. Mammoth might become rarer, then local, then memory. A hunting tradition built around one animal could not survive unchanged if that animal disappeared from the local world. People had to adjust, and adjustment always carried risk. The loss of large animals meant more than the loss of meat. It meant the loss of hides large enough for shelters, bones strong enough for frames, tusks useful for construction or tools, fat dense enough for winter energy, and predictable migration routes around which people had organized time. A mammoth was not only a meal, it was a structure of possibilities. A reindeer herd was not only food, it was clothing, thread, antler, rhythm, and seasonal certainty. When animals vanished or moved away, human technology had to shift. Diets diversified, mobility patterns changed. Settlements may have moved closer to rivers, coasts, forests, or smaller game. Some groups adapted successfully. Others may have faded from particular landscapes, leaving only scattered evidence behind. This was not always collapse. In some places, warming created new resources. Forests brought deer, boar, nuts, berries, wood, and different tools. Rivers and lakes changed, sometimes offering fish and waterfowl. Coastal zones, where preserved, reveal the importance of marine resources for some populations. But for people whose survival systems have been shaped by open frozen plains, the new world could be as disruptive as the old one had been harsh. A landscape can become richer in one sense and still destroy an older way of life. The thaw did not simply rescue humanity from ice, it forced another transformation. There is a lesser-known difficulty in studying this transition. Many of the places where late Ice Age people might have adapted to changing coasts are now underwater, because sea levels rose as glaciers melted. Camps, shell middens, fishing sites, boat landings, and coastal routes may lie drowned beneath modern seas. This missing evidence can make ancient adaptation look more inland than it really was. The record is biased toward what remained above water. So when scholars reconstruct how people responded to vanishing animals, they must also reckon with vanished shorelines. Predators faced the crisis too. Wolves, big cats, hyenas, bears, and other carnivores depended on the same animal worlds. When prey shifted, predators moved, declined, or changed behavior. Humans were part of this ecological web, not outside it. They competed with scavengers, followed predator signs to carcasses, protected kills from carnivores, and sometimes benefited from predator activity. If a large herbivores became scarce, competition around carcasses may have intensified. A lean season could make all meat-eaters bolder. The frozen world was not a simple human versus nature story, it was a web of hunger. Ancient people likely noticed animal decline long before it became permanent. They would have seen fewer tracks, smaller herds, longer journeys, changing fat levels, altered calving grounds, or unfamiliar species appearing where others had gone. These observations may have entered stories and warnings. The archaeological record cannot easily preserve the first generation that realized an old pattern had broken, but it can show shifts in animal bones at sites, changes in toolkits, new settlement patterns, and different uses of landscape. What survives suggests resilience, though not without cost. The mystery of vanished animals also shadows human identity. Groups often build meaning around the creatures that sustain them. A people who depend on reindeer do not see reindeer merely as meat. A people who use mammoth bone for shelter do not experience mammoth as an abstract resource. These animals shape movement, memory, craft, danger, and perhaps belief. When such animals disappeared, ancient people lost not only food, but a familiar order of the world, the songs, stories, and rituals tied to vanished herds are mostly gone. But the emotional weight of such change should not be underestimated. There may have been difficult choices. When a favourite prey became scarce, did hunters travel farther and risk more? Did groups split? Did they seek alliances? Did they turn more heavily to fish, birds, smaller mammals, stored foods, or plant resources? Did some camps become abandoned because the surrounding animal world no longer supported them? The evidence remains incomplete, and the answers varied by region, but the pressure itself is clear. A survival system built over thousands of years can be shaken when its animals disappear. By the end of the Ice Age, humans had already proven their flexibility many times. They had crossed cold plains, endured long winters, built shelter from bone and hide, and read snow like a living text. Yet the disappearance and movement of animals revealed a deeper truth: adaptation never ends. The skills that saved people in one world may become less useful in another. Endless snow had taught humans to follow herds. The changing climate taught them that even herds could vanish. So the story of ancient cold survival cannot remain only a tale of triumph. It must include loss. The white plains that once held immense animal life began, in many places, to change beyond recognition. Some creatures followed the cold northward or upward. Some survived in reduced ranges. Some disappeared forever. People watched, adjusted, remembered, and moved into new patterns of life. The snow had been a teacher, but it was not eternal, and as animals vanished from the frozen earth, ancient communities faced the unsettling truth that survival knowledge is powerful only while the world it answers still exists. The frozen earth did not only trap people in place, sometimes it opened roads that would not exist in warmer times. Ice locked water away, sea levels fell, and broad plains emerged where modern oceans now roll in darkness. Rivers froze into temporary paths. Tundra stretched across regions that later forests, bogs, and seas would transform. In this shifting world, ancient people moved not as aimless wanderers, but as families and bands following animals, memory, opportunity, a necessity through landscapes that were both dangerous and strangely connected. The greatest symbol of this frozen movement is Beringia, the vast land region that once linked Northeast Asia and northwestern North America. It was not simply a narrow bridge crossed in a single dramatic march. It was a wide, inhabited landscape of steppe, tundra, wetlands, animals, seasons, and human possibility. People may have lived there for generations, perhaps far longer, as ice sheets blocked or opened routes farther east and south. Scholars still debate the exact timing and pathways of the first movements into the Americas, including inland corridors, coastal routes, and the role of now submerged shorelines. The evidence remains incomplete, especially because rising seas later drowned many ancient coastal traces. Crossing frozen lands required more than courage. It required planning around food, fuel, weather, shelter, children, and unknown territory. A route that looked open on the horizon might hide impassable ice, thin resources, or storms that arrived without warning. People did not need to know they were entering a new continent in the modern sense. They needed to know whether the next valley held animals, whether a coast offered food, whether a pass could be crossed before weather closed it, whether the group could return if the path failed. Migration was not one grand decision. It was a chain of smaller decisions, each one made under pressure. Following herds could pull people across great distances. Reindeer, horse, bison, and other animals moved through cold environments along seasonal routes, and human groups could follow, intercept, or settle near predictable passages. But people also carried their own networks of knowledge. Stone from distant sources, ornaments, pigments, and shared tool traditions suggest contacts across wide regions. These were not empty migrations through blank space. They were movements through social and ecological worlds, where information may have travelled as importantly as bodies did. Frozen rivers and lowered coastlines may have helped movement in some places, A frozen river could become a road, smoother than forest or broken ground, but also dangerous when ice weakened. A coastline could offer marine foods, birds, shellfish, stranded animals, and navigation landmarks. Yet many such routes are now underwater. This creates one of the great hidden gaps in the story. Ancient people may have used shorelines extensively, but the sea has swallowed much of the evidence. What survives on land may be only part of the journey. There is a strange tension in these migrations. Cold made life harder, but it also connected worlds. The same glacial conditions that threatened bodies exposed new land and shifted animal ranges. A family moving across Beringia, a group crossing tundra valleys in Eurasia, or hunters pushing into high cold regions were not necessarily seeking adventure. They may have been following known patterns one step farther than before, yet over generations. These steps could carry human beings into landscapes no ancestor had known. No single explanation fully accounts for every ancient movement through frozen lands. Climate mattered, but so did animals. Population pressure may have mattered in some places, but opportunity mattered too. Social ties, curiosity, conflict, and local scarcity could all play roles. The archaeological record shows arrival points and scattered traces, but rarely the emotional reality of departure. It does not show the argument before leaving a familiar camp, the fear of crossing unknown ice, or the relief of finding fresh tracks beyond a ridge. As people crossed frozen earth, they carried more than tools. They carried fire knowledge, clothing skills, stories of weather, methods of butchery, childcare routines, ornaments, and ways of reading snow. They carried language, though the words are gone. They carried memory of animals that may later disappear. They carried the human habit of making meaning wherever survival allowed. In this sense, migration through cold was not only biological expansion, it was the movement of whole worlds inside small groups of people. Some routes closed behind them, ice advanced, seas rose, herds changed direction. A path used by one generation might be impossible for the next. This makes ancient migration feel almost ghost-like. People crossed lands that no longer exist, followed coasts now drowned, and camped on plains erased by water or buried by sediment. The map of their world was not our map. To understand their journey, the modern mind has to imagine continents with missing shorelines, animals in vanished ranges, and cold corridors opening and closing like slow gates. The consequences were enormous. Human beings reached new lands, encountered new animals, adapted to new seasons, and eventually formed the deep ancestry of later populations. Yet every great movement began with ordinary survival tasks: keeping children warm, protecting fire, finding food, repairing clothing, and choosing the next camp. The frozen earth did not reward dramatic ambition. It rewarded attention repeated across generations. By crossing these cold spaces, ancient people proved that the skills learned in snow could become engines of world history. Clothing became mobility, fire became continuity, social memory became navigation, hunting knowledge became geography. The same practices that kept a group alive during one winter could, over centuries, carry humanity across continents. And still, the snow kept its silence. It did not announce that a land bridge would one day vanish under the sea. It did not tell the travellers that their footprints belonged to a turning point in human history. It only offered signs, tracks, wind, ice, shelter, hunger, distance. Ancient people followed those signs because survival demanded it. In doing so, they crossed the frozen earth and widened the human world beyond anything their ancestors could have imagined. The thaw did not arrive as mercy, it came unevenly, in pulses of warmth, meltwater, instability, and surprise. After ages of cold pressure, ice sheets began to retreat in many regions, but retreating ice did not simply reveal a peaceful new world. It broke landscapes open. Rivers swelled. Lakes formed behind ice dams. Sea levels rose. Coastlines moved. Permafrost softened. Slopes collapsed. Forests advanced into places that had once been open steppe. Animals shifted, scattered, or disappeared. For ancient people who had learned to live with snow, warming could be as disruptive as freezing had once been. The old frozen world had been harsh, but it had rules. Herds followed open grasslands, wind-scoured ridges exposed winter grazing, snow recorded tracks, certain shelters, routes, and hunting grounds could be remembered across seasons. As the climate warmed, those rules began to change. A valley that once guided reindeer might fill with trees. A plain that once supported mammoth and horse might turn wetter, brushier, less open. A river crossing might become too dangerous during melt. A coastline used by generations might drown beneath rising water. What survives in the record suggests that ancient people adapted again and again. But the evidence remains incomplete because many of the most important places of transition now lie underwater, eroded, or buried beneath later worlds. The thaw created abundance in some ways. Forests brought new plants, nuts, berries, roots, wood, deer, boar, birds, and smaller animals. Rivers and lakes could support fish, waterfowl, beaver, and seasonal gatherings. Warmer conditions made some regions easier for the human body. Fuel could become more available where trees expanded, but a richer environment is not automatically easier for people trained by generations of open cold. Dense forest changes visibility. Herds become less predictable in the old way. Large animals may no longer gather in vast numbers across the plains. Hunting methods built for open landscapes must be altered. Tools, shelters, movement, and memory all have to adjust. This is one of the quiet contradictions of human history. Survival skills can become outdated when the world changes. The knowledge that once saved lives may no longer answer the most urgent problems. A group that knew every winter path of reindeer might face a landscape where those paths were gone. A shelter tradition built around scarce wood and large hides might shift when trees became common, but mammoth vanished. Clothing still mattered, but perhaps differently. Food storage, fishing, plant processing, woodworking, and new seasonal schedules became more important in many regions. No single explanation fully accounts for the pace of these changes, because each landscape warmed in its own way. The thaw also brought danger through water. Melting glaciers fed powerful rivers. Ice-dammed lakes could drain suddenly. Wetlands expanded. Rising seas swallowed lowlands where people may have lived for generations. To modern eyes, sea level rise is a line on a chart. To ancient communities, it meant camps disappearing, shellfish beds shifting, freshwater sources turning brackish, familiar paths lost beneath waves. Some movements may have been gradual enough for adaptation. Others may have been sudden enough to become remembered disasters. Scholars still debate how specific flood stories and landscape memories relate to post-glacial changes, and unsupported claims should be treated cautiously. But the physical transformation was real. As the cold retreated, human choices widened and became more complex. Some groups continued to follow remaining cold-adapted animals northward or into highlands. Others settled more deeply into river valleys, coasts, forests, and lake regions. Some developed increasingly specialized fishing and foraging systems. Over long periods, in some parts of the world, changing climate and plant communities contributed to the conditions under which farming would later emerge. Though agriculture is not an immediate or inevitable result of the thaw, it developed independently in different regions for different reasons. The end of the Ice Age did not create farmers overnight. It created new pressures and opportunities that human groups answered in many ways. There was grief in this transformation, though archaeology can only hint at it. People who had grown up with stories of great herds may have watched those animals become rare. Children may have learned names for creatures they would never see in the same numbers as their grandparents had. Tools designed for one world may have been modified for another. Camps once returned to across generations may have been abandoned not because people forgot them, but because the land around them no longer worked. The thaw changed not only survival but belonging. Yet ancient people did not simply lose the frozen world. They carried lessons from it forward. The discipline of preparation, the art of reading seasons, the value of storage, the importance of clothing, the social power of shared food, and the ability to move when conditions failed did not vanish with the snow. These habits became part of broader human resilience. The frozen world had taught people that nature could change beyond expectation, and that survival belonged to those who could learn again. The end of endless snow was therefore not an ending in the simple sense. It was another turning point. Ice withdrew, animals vanished or moved, forests rose, waters climbed, and human beings entered a more varied but still uncertain world. The old white plains became memory, buried in bones, tools, pigments, and stories that did not survive in full. But the people who had lived through cold carried something powerful into the thaw, the knowledge that humans could endure a world that seemed impossible, so long as they kept watching, making, sharing, and remembering. What the snow remembered, it remembered unevenly. It kept a footprint only where mud, ash, mineral crust, or frozen ground happened to protect it. It kept a hearth only where later storms, floods, animals, and people failed to erase it. It kept bones when soil chemistry allowed, tools when stone resisted time, and pigments when dry darkness guarded them. It did not keep the sound of children breathing under hides. It did not keep the smell of smoke in fur. It did not keep the exact warning an elder gave before a dangerous crossing, or the private grief of a family when the herd did not return. The frozen past survives as fragments, and yet those fragments are enough to show that ancient people did not merely endure endless snow. They understood it deeply enough to make a human world within it. Their legacy is not one invention, but a pattern of adaptation. They carried warmth into places where the body had no natural right to be comfortable. They made clothing from animals and turned clothing into movement. They made shelters from bone, hide, stone, snow, and wind knowledge. They used fire not only to cook but to extend memory through darkness. They followed animal routes, read tracks, guarded children, cared for the injured, and transformed danger into routine where they could. No single explanation fully accounts for their success, because their success was never simple. It came from many skills braided together until survival became possible. Modern life can make this ancient intelligence difficult to see. Warm rooms, stored food, mapped roads, weather forecasts, insulated boots, and electric light conceal how much knowledge once had to live directly in the mind and hands. Ancient people could not check a storm warning. They watched the sky, the wind, the animals, the snow surface, and the behavior of fire. They could not buy a coat. They had to create one from a living creature, a sharp edge, a bone needle, and long experience. They could not assume water from a tap. They melted snow, broke ice, chose camps near streams, and spent fuel to drink. What survives in the record suggests that their world was hard, but not crude. It was precise. The most powerful legacy of ancient cold survival may be the realization that human beings are not adapted to environments only through their bodies. Humans adapt through relationships, memory, and making. A single person is fragile in snow. A group carrying shared knowledge can become astonishingly durable. A body without fur can sew fur. A species without claws can shape stone. A creature born helpless can grow within a community that protects, teaches, and remembers. This is the ancient human answer to hostile landscapes, not domination, not escape, but transformation through culture. Yet the story also carries warning. The frozen worlds changed, animals vanished, roots drowned. Old knowledge had to be revised or abandoned. Survival was never guaranteed forever. The people who endured the snow lived inside moving climates, and their lives remind us that landscapes we consider permanent may be only temporary arrangements in deep time. The evidence remains incomplete, but the lesson is clear enough. Human skill is powerful, but it is always tied to the world that skill understands. When the world changes, survival depends on learning again. So the snow remembers both strength and fragility. It remembers the footprint and its disappearance. It remembers the hearth and the cold around it. It remembers the mammoth bone built into a wall, the needle small enough to fit in a hand, the blade that opened marrow, the ash that protected an ember. It remembers that ancient people crossed white distances not because the land was kind, but because they had become careful, inventive, and bound together. In the long history of humanity, the endless snow was not a blank chapter. It was one of the places where human possibility was tested most severely, and where, against the wind, it held. And now the storm grows quieter. The white distance softens. The fire that has carried this story from the first frozen ridge to the last remembered trace burns lower, not in danger, but in calm. Around it, the ancient figures become less distinct, as all people do when time widens behind them. Their faces are gone. Their names are gone. The words they used for snow, hunger, fire, mother, child, animal, and home are gone, but something of them remains in the old ground, in the cut bone, in the ash-darkened soil, in the careful needle, in the memory of paths that once crossed land now hidden beneath sea or forest. They lived in a world that asked much from them. It asked for patience before every hunt, discipline before every storm, attention before every step. It asked them to make warmth instead of waiting for it, to share food when hunger made sharing difficult, to carry children through weather that did not care whether they survived. It asked them to learn from animals, from wind, from ice, from failure, and from the dead. They answered not perfectly and not always successfully, but often enough for the line of human life to continue. The snow itself has mostly vanished from those old camps. The ice has retreated. The plains have changed. Herds that once darkened the distance are gone, or reduced to echoes in bone and memory. Rivers have shifted their beds. Coasts have drowned. Forests have grown where cold grass once bent under winter light. Yet the ancient lesson lingers. Human beings are small under weather, but not empty-handed. They carry fire. They carry one another. They carry memory until memory becomes shelter. In the final image, there is no grand monument, no city wall, No written tablet announcing victory over winter. There is only a low glow inside a shelter while snow moves outside. A child sleeps under fur. A tool waits near the hearth. An ember is covered carefully for morning. Beyond the entrance, the frozen land stretches into darkness, immense and silent. Inside, warmth remains, small but guarded. And for one more night in the long cold history of the earth, human life continues.